Welcome to Cut the Crop, keeping you in the know about everything you grow. Researchers, growers and other interesting folk delivering insights and information on topics ranging from agronomy to profitability. Brought to you by the Foundation for Arable Research.
Hello and welcome. My name's Alison Stewart and I'm your host of Cut the Crop. And today we have the cereal researcher from FAR, Jo Drummond. Welcome.
Thank you, Alison.
And we're going to be talking about keeping your silos and grain storage areas super clean. Sounds pretty mundane, but really important. So let's talk first of all around why are we doing this? Like, what are the pests and problems that growers can have if they don't make sure that the whole grain area is super hygienic?
Well, the first thing I'll say is that cleanliness is in fact next to godliness. And now we're in the really busy part of the season and we'll be starting to think in the back of our minds that harvest is around the corner. So for those of us who are going to be emptying silos and preparing for the next lot of grain that comes in, now's a really good time to start checking and making sure that we're nice and clean. And having a clean silo is the foundation of any silo management program.
So, what pests are we talking about then?
So there are a number of pests and they fall into two categories. So they can either be primary pests. So those are pests that feed on the grain itself. So they've got the mouthpieces that tunnel into the grain and sort of core out the grain. And examples of those are things like weevils or lesser grain borers. The other type of pest is a secondary pest. Now, a secondary pest can come in at any stage. It doesn't need to have a primary infection first. Those are species that don't feed directly on the grain itself. They tend to feed on sort of molds and detritus of grain that's been sitting in the silo. So they tend to be mold feeders, or they tend to be species that don't have those mouthpieces that can tunnel into the grain. And some examples of those that we've picked up in some of our survey work over the years are the likes of a sawtooth grain beetle, species like soakids, so those are the little book lice, quite hard to see with the naked eye. Species like flower beetles, my favourite is the confused flower beetle, and other things like flat grain beetles and mould beetles. So there's a whole raft of species that are going to be secondary and they can be in your silo at any time.
So what kind of, like if you don't do anything and you get a bad infestation, what kind of damage can occur?
Well, the worst thing that can happen is that you'll have a rejection on your grain. So whether that's for milling or whether that's rejected for feed. We don't want these things in our grain products, so we need to keep them out as much as we can.
Yeah. So obviously, given the fact that we're doing this podcast now,
yes,
this is obviously a good time that you want growers to start thinking about it.
Absolutely. Start thinking about it. If you haven't been checking your grain over the course of the season, now is the time to do it. Ideally, you'd be checking that on a monthly basis, and as the weather gets a little bit more warmer, you'd be checking it maybe fortnightly. And Production Wise has a really nice section within the grain storage app where you're able to make records of your inspections. What you're really needing to do is making sure that everything is tip-top ready to be cleaned out. So when we're cleaning out, we're making sure that it's all swept, we're putting pressure washers through it if we need to, and making sure that that surface is really clean, ready to be surface treated as we prepare for grain coming in the next intake.
So let's just talk through this process of what good preparation actually means.
Absolutely. And the thing I'll point out is that some of these species are actually capable of living in very small pockets of grain. They're also capable of living in dust particles. So if you've got a crack in the floor, or if you've got joins in metal or down the creases of anything, they can live in there. So making sure that when your silo is clean, it's really, really clean. Making sure that the area surrounding your silo is really clean, cleaning up any spills. Some Australian data suggests that if you've got insects in a bag, over the course of a year you'll have 1 million insects. And I know this to be true because I've bred colonies of sawtooth grain beetles that have been collected from around Canterbury. I started with 30 live adults in a jar, and over the course of 18 months I had about 1.5 million. So they like each other a lot and often, and they don't need a lot of grain to survive. So making sure clean is really clean. So sweep it, put a pressure washer through it, make sure that it's, even compressed air getting into all of those spaces because they can hide anywhere. So making sure you've got a really, really good platform because that's the best way to keep grain storage pests out.
So what about products? I mean, what products are available for growers?
And this is another challenge that we face because there's not actually very many products available. And if you are going to be structurally treating your storage unit, have a look on that label, because those labels will give a recommendation of how soon out from filling you need to treat them. The majority of the products out there are going to contain an organophosphate, and the main organophosphate they contain is pyrimethos methyl. Now, pyrimethos methyl is a grain protectant, as are the other organophosphate products on the market, the likes of a Moldicin. That's also an organophosphate, and there is another co-formulated product that is the organophosphate plus a synthetic pyrethroid. Again, they're all grain protectants, so they are there to prevent an infestation from coming in. And I should point out that the grain storage pests that we have in New Zealand are grain storage specific, so you're not bringing them in out of the field. So they will walk from one storage to another. So if you've got a crummy old silo down the end of the yard that you haven't checked for years, they can walk between storage systems. So there are limited products out there. The protectants are going to give you about 9 months of protection or thereabouts. And if you're going to be treating your structure, that's using the likes of the smoke products. You can use a liquid product to go up the sides of the silo. There is a product out there that's non-chemical. It's a diatomaceous earth, so that's an inert clay. You can treat your structure with that. That particular product has a few tricks that you need to consider. It can change the surface area of how your grain flows, but it is a non-chemical option and doesn't have a residue associated with it.
So are we talking about repeated applications, or can you only go in there and really treat them once, or are you looking at a program?
Ideally, you treat it once and treat it really well, following all of the label specifications and making sure that you've got the timing right between when your silo is empty and nice and clean. And that's why it's really good to have this conversation now, making sure that you're clean now. Allows you time to come back and have a look and see if you've got any problems arising before you treat that structure.
So what about the outside areas around, like the grassy areas around the silos?
It helps if you keep them down, so you can spray out. You've got to be a little bit careful too, because we have issues with herbicide resistance that we do know about. So making sure if you are going to be spraying out around your silo, you're using a product that's not going to push yourself down that pathway. Cleaning up any spills. I mean, we know we've got chocks of wood, where trucks back up to it when you're augering and things like that. Keeping them free from grain and not giving these little critters a place to hide.
So if people have got grain in their silo and it's got an infestation, can you come in and clean it up, or is everything proactive? You have to get in there in advance.
Ideally, you're getting in there in advance, because that is where you're going to get the best efficacy on your products. But if you do have a problem, the easiest thing to do is to either talk to your rep or give us a ring, and we can talk you through a strategy to manage that. Now, if you are going to be needing some knockdown effect, there are a couple of things that you can do. But that actually relies a little bit on the integrity of your structure. So that's the likes of a phosphine gas-producing type chemistry. And for those to be really 100% effective, we need to have a totally gas-tight sealed unit. And none of the units that we have in New Zealand are gas-tight to that standard. So we have to sort of have a bit of a compromise with that. There is one exception to that, and that is for those who use the grain bags. So that is a perfectly gas-tight sealed unit. So we have to expect that it will work, but it might not be 100% effective. If you have got an infestation and you're not using things like that, you can move grain from one silo to another and treat the grain topically as you go. It's a bit of messing around, but there are things that you can do. But ideally, by keeping it clean to start with and making sure that if we are using a structural treatment, we're treating it properly, we should hopefully avoid those types of scenarios.
So are there any sort of like future risks from the point of view of access and availability of these chemicals?
Oh, absolutely. Organophosphates, we know, are under increasing scrutiny. So some of these products are already on the EPA priorities list. So that's something that needs to be taken into consideration. The other thing that needs to be taken into consideration is the development of resistance. Now, we are really behind the 8 ball in terms of this. We do not have a lot of products out there. We're not able to mix and match and rotate our chemistry like we are with the likes of herbicide resistance and in fungicides, where you've got different products that you can have as part of programs. We're not in a position to be able to do that. And that means we're seeing repeated applications year on year of the same thing. And work we've done at FAR has been, we've been developing resistance tests. We've done mini silo tests where we scale your, 100, 200, 400 ton silo down into a little jar, and we're introducing sawtooth grain beetles, and we're treating that grain with the product to make sure we can still maintain efficacy. And we've collected about 5 populations from across Canterbury. And some of those populations tend to be less sensitive. So it's just something we need to have in the back of our mind. I'm not saying resistance at this stage, because we've done that subsequent dose rate response testing using lethal dose, and our resistance factors are still within the baseline of what's reported internationally. But it's just something we need to have on the radar.
Yeah.
That repeat applications of the same mode of action is a pathway that's really hard to come back from. And if we break what we've got, there is nothing else. So having that integrated approach is so, so important.
Yes, absolutely. So, best piece of advice that you can give to growers to manage this problem and make sure that we've still got effective management strategies for a long time to come.
100% cleanliness is next to godliness. Let's be the ambulance at the top of the cliff rather than the bottom. Keep it clean. Yeah. It's the easiest and most surefire way of ensuring that your silo or grain storage management is going to be working for you in the best way that it can.
Yeah. And when you think about it, you've spent all of that time and money
absolutely.
getting the crop.
Absolutely.
The last thing you want to do is lose anything in the grain storage area.
Oh, 100%. You spent all that time and energy walking it and loving it and throwing everything that it needs at it, and then you shut the door and you walk away.
Yeah.
Just keep looking at it, because I really don't like going out to a farm and opening the door and seeing all the insects come out to meet me. And if you have got a problem, and if you are remote and not at a place that I or the FAR team can access, put them in a bag and send them to me. I love getting post that crawls out at me. It's,
Yeah.
If you're worried about it, please give us a ring or contact your rep, because there are strategies out there that can help you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jo.
Thank you.
And thank you, listeners. Have a great day on the farm.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Cut the Crop, presented to you by FAR. If you'd like to know more about any of the topics discussed or have any suggestions for future topics, go to www.cutthecrop.co.nz.